The dust came first, drifting low across the street like a living thing, curling around boots and wagon wheels, creeping into lungs and eyes, until the whole town of Red Hollow looked half swallowed by the desert that had birthed it and was now ready to reclaim it. People said nothing good ever lasted long in Red Hollow, and Clara May Whitmore had learned that truth before she ever learned how to hope. She knelt there in the dirt, knees aching, palms scraped raw, her breath shallow, as she stared up at the man who could decide whether she lived or vanished like so many others whose names were no longer spoken. The cowboy loomed over her, tall and broad-shouldered, his shadow cutting across her like a blade. He smelled of leather, sweat and gun oil, and his eyes, cold, sharp, unreadable, held none of the hunger she had seen in other men's faces when desperation drove her to them. That unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. Around them, the town had gone quiet, doors shut, curtains drawn, everyone pretending they didn't see a woman, at the mercy of a man who answered to no one. Clara's heart hammered as memories crashed through her mind. Her father buried under a crude wooden cross, her mother coughing herself to death in a rented room, the banknote stamped overdue, the ranch seized by men who smiled while they stole. She had come to Red Hollow with nothing but the dress on her back and a foolish belief that work could save her. Instead, she'd found debt, threats, and now this moment. The knife in the cowboy's hand glinted in the sun as he held it low, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the promise of pain in the air. His name was whispered through town like a curse. Ethan Cole. The man who rode in alone and left alone. The man who survived ambushes that killed better men. The man who didn't belong anywhere because anywhere he stayed ended up burned or buried. Clara swallowed and lifted her chin, forcing herself not to beg the way others had. Pride was a thin shield, but it was all. Before nightfall, head north where the land was rough but honest, where a man's name still meant something if he fought hard enough for it. Clara listened, torn between terror and something dangerously close to belief. When they reached his horse, she stopped. "I can't pay you," she said, needing him to understand that truth. He met her gaze, and in that moment she saw the loneliness etched deep into him, the cost of surviving when everyone else fell. "I'm not buying," he replied. "I'm offering." The choice hung there, fragile and fierce. Behind her was Red Hollow and a future written in fear. Ahead was a man she didn't know, a road that promised nothing but uncertainty. Clara took a breath that felt like a lifetime and stepped forward. As Ethan lifted her onto the horse, steady and sure, the town faded behind them. She didn't know yet that this decision would cost her tears, blood, and a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She didn't know that the man riding beside her would change her life, not with what he took, but with what he gave. And as they rode into the dying light, the dust swallowing their tracks, one truth settled deep in her. Bones, sometimes mercy doesn't come in the form you expect, and sometimes the wildest legends begin with a woman refusing to disappear. If this story stirred something in you, if you want to ride deeper into tales of grit, redemption, in the untamed West, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter will reveal a promise neither of them saw coming, and a name that would change everything. Night fell hard and fast on the open plains, the sky bleeding from gold to bruised purple as Clara clung to the saddle behind Ethan, the rhythm of the horse's gait slowly calming the storm inside her chest. The world beyond Red Hollow felt impossibly wide, like stepping off the edge of a known map into blank parchment where anything or nothing could be written. The wind bit through her thin dress, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, and Ethan wordlessly shrugged off his coat, draping it around her shoulders without slowing the horse. The gesture was simple, practical, and yet it struck her harder than any grand declaration could have. No man had ever covered her from the cold without expecting something in return. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy with unasked questions. They made camp just before midnight in a shallow ravine, hidden from the road, where the land dipped enough to offer shelter from prying eyes. Ethan moved with the efficiency of a man who'd slept beneath more stars than roofs, building a fire small enough to stay invisible from afar. Clara watched him, studying the way his hands worked, scarred and steady, and wondered how many nights like this he'd survived alone. When he finally sat across from her, the firelight carved his face into sharp planes of shadow and glow. You can sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. She nodded, though. Can sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. She nodded, though sleep felt impossible. The ground was hard, her body exhausted. Her mind racing with everything she'd lost and everything she'd just gambled on. Hours passed in fragments, dozing, waking, listening to the crackle of fire and the distant cry of coyotes. At some point she realized Ethan hadn't moved, hadn't leaned toward her, hadn't looked at her the way men in Red Hollow always had. The understanding settled slowly and painfully. He truly expected nothing from her body, nothing at all. By dawn, when the sky softened to pale blue and the cold crept deeper into her bones, Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring, respect, mixed with fear of hoping too much. They rode again as the sun climbed, the land growing harsher, rockier, beautiful in its indifference. Along the way, Ethan spoke in pieces, not stories but facts, as if offering her truth without inviting pity. He told her he'd once had a family, a small spread and a name spoken with warmth instead of warning. A land dispute had turned violent, the kind of violence that left graves instead of justice. The men responsible had worn badges. Ethan survived. His family didn't. After that, he stopped staying anywhere long enough to belong. Clara listened, understanding more than she wanted to. Loss recognized loss. By midday, they reached a lonely settlement, a cluster of buildings, clinging to a river bend like stubborn weeds. Ethan dismounted and helped her down, his touch careful, respectful, as if afraid of crossing a line she hadn't drawn but desperately needed him to see. Inside the general store, whispers followed them. A man and a woman riding together meant things in the West, and Clara felt old shame flare in her chest until Ethan placed a hand on the counter and said clearly, "She's with me." The words were simple, but the way he said them, steady, final, shifted something in the room. Supplies were bought, glances avoided. Outside again, Clara realized her hands were shaking. "You don't owe me protection," she said. Ethan met her eyes, and for the first time there was something fierce there. Not anger, but resolve. "Everyone deserves it," he replied. They camped that night near the river, the sound of water easing the ache in her mind. As days passed, the road tested them. Storms that soaked them to the bone. Bandits they narrowly avoided. Hunger that gnawed when supplies ran thin. Through it all, Ethan never treated her as a burden or a bargain. He taught her how to ride better, how to read the sky, how to fire a rifle with steady breath. Clara learned fast, surprising herself with a strength born from necessity and trust. One evening, as lightning split the horizon and thunder rolled like judgment, they took shelter beneath a rocky overhang. The storm trapped them there, close enough to feel each other's warmth without touching. Clara's voice broke the quiet. "Back there, in Red Hollow," she said. "I thought that was all I had left to offer." Ethan didn't look at her right away. When he did, his eyes were dark, intense, and painfully honest. "They taught you wrong," he said. The words undid her. Tears came then, silent and unstoppable, years of fear and degradation pouring out. Ethan didn't rush her, didn't pull her close. He simply stayed solid and present until the storm passed inside and out. Weeks later, they reached the land Ethan had spoken of, a rough stretch, near the foothills where grass still fought its way through stone and the air smelled clean. An abandoned homestead sat there, broken but standing, waiting for hands willing to rebuild. Clara's chest tightened. "This was yours," she realized. Ethan nodded. "It was," he said. "Could be again, if you want." The weight of the choice pressed down on her, heavier than the one she'd made in Red Hollow, because this time it wasn't about survival alone. It was about belonging. "I don't want to be someone passing through," she said softly. "I want a place where I can stand." Ethan studied her, and in that look was a question he hadn't yet asked out loud. Days turned into labor, mending fences, clearing debris, coaxing life back into the land. Neighbors, wary at first, began to help, drawn by Ethan's reputation and Clara's quiet determination. She felt herself changing, shoulders squaring, voice steadying, shame loosening its grip. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in fire, Ethan approached her holding a folded paper. "A deed. This land needs a name that won't run from it," he said. "I'm tired of running too." Clara's breath caught as he continued, voice rough but sure. "I can offer you more than protection. I can offer you my name, not as payment, as partnership." The world seemed to still. She thought of the night she'd knelt in the dirt, believing her body was her only currency, and felt something break free inside her. "I don't need saving," she said, tears shining but strong. "But I choose this." Ethan nodded, a smile ghosting across his lips, the kind earned, not taken, when he spoke her name with his. When he promised a future built, not on fear but on respect, the West itself seemed to listen. Clara Whitmore became Clara Cole, not because she was owned, but because she was chosen, and choosing in return. Together they faced the land, the work, the whispers. And slowly the legend changed. People didn't talk about the woman who offered herself for mercy anymore. They talked about the woman who found her strength, and the cowboy who learned that redemption sometimes rides in on a dusty road, wearing courage instead of chains. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, hard roads, and names reclaimed, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More stories of Wild West glory, grit, and redemption are coming, and the next legend is just beginning.